Oh, yeah. I guess there's some differences in I think I've been then I'll let you do yours before I let anybody go. Have something specific to speak about. Speak about.
Hi, I'm with Progress Ms. How are you? I'm Liz, both secretary student. Oh, great.
We're going to start the subcommittee till we get a quorum. So the committee meeting for financial government organization and elections is open, and the first bill is mine. So, Vice Chairman, if you take the chair. Bill is SB 345. Thank you.
Hearing Senate Bill 345. Mr. Lawson, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. For the record, Jay Wasson, representing the people of the 20th Senate District, to introduce Senate Bill 345. I'll have some far more expert opinions up here than mine. What this basically does is the fees that are charged different loan and mortgage entities in the state of Missouri have not changed in at least 10 years. I think we all know over the last 10 years how much more regulation has been put upon us, mostly through Washington, a lot of it that we have to do. And as today, the banks are paying, I think, a far more larger proportion of the fees for the inspections or the audits than the others are. So this is, they're not big fees. I think probably a couple of $100 is the average. But we're talking about well, pretty much all the credit institutions, other than the banks. That we're talking that our financial department is over. I do have some experts to come up. I will answer any questions that anyone has. If not, I'm sure they can answer anything.
Call your first witness. Every question is Senator. You call your first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rich Lamb. I'm with the Department of Insurance, Financial Institutions, Professional Registration. We want to thank you all for hearing the bill today, and we certainly want to thank Senator Wasson for filing this legislation. The Division of Finance within our department, we of course regulate state chartered banks, trust companies, mortgage brokers, and savings and loans. We also, of course, regulate the consumer lenders such as payday loans, title loans, installment loans, those types of things. The division is a fee-funded agency, and by that I mean our operating budget is, which is of course subject to appropriation from the General Assembly, comes from the entities we regulate. The Missouri statute requires that the expenses incurred by the division shall be charged to and paid by the corporation for whom they were incurred or performed. And so basically, the statute kind of envisions a process where each entity type will pay for the regulatory activities. The statute also requires that on an annual basis, the Division of Finance review the fees and charges to determine if they're appropriate and if they should be revised. And with banks, the statute allows us to set up a formula where we can change that, and it's based on assets in each bank. And so we're able to change that each year to make sure that we're collecting enough from them to cover the regulatory activities. With mortgage lenders, again, the statute allows us the opportunity to set that by a formula where we can change it on a yearly basis. When we get to consumer loan lenders, those fees are set in statute. So we are unable, obviously, to change that funding structure. Only the legislature can change the statute. So what's happened is over time, and Senator Watson kind of alluded to this, a lot of these fees were originally set up, some of them back in the late 80s when some of these lending institutions were set up. So they haven't changed in decades. And what's happened is over time, obviously, the cost of regulating has gone up, just like inflation in anything. So what's happened is that right now the banks are paying a disproportionate share for the regulatory activities. And so by raising this across the board, $200, we figured we would be able to bring that back in line in parity and have everybody paying the appropriate share. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
I might add, Mr. Chairman, if I could, there was only one entity that I know of that disagreed with this, of the ones that we're doing it to, and we took them out, and the reason was because they were already paying a much higher fee than anyone else. So as a substitute that I had, they would be taken out. And as far as I know, to my knowledge, no one else is in disagreement with this.
Bruce, is that money strictly included in the division of finance? Does not go to other divisions?
It goes to the Division of Finance Fund, yes, sir. And again, it's subject to appropriation from the General Assembly.
Questions?
Real quick, when was the last time was this raised?
It depends which fee. I basically the answer is whenever they were originally set up. So like I think in I can give you some examples. Let's see, for payday loans, they were originally set up in 1990. It hasn't changed. For title loans, they were set up in 1998. They also haven't changed. We go back to some other ones like motor vehicle finance, 1986. Sales finance, like when you go buy furniture, get credit, 1986. So it's been a long time.
So when we increase these up to this amount, it's not necessarily the amount's going to go up that much. It could go up to 5, right? Depending on what it is.
No, they would go up.
So it all go up to that amount?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Right, thanks.
Doesn't affect people that have money transfers or issue money orders, like the grocery store?
They would be in this mix as well. Yes, sir. Money orders right now are $100. They were originally set up in 1984. They would go to $300. And I would say that, $500 according to what is the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, $500 in 1986 is now like $1,080 if you factor in inflation. So it's still a pretty good deal.
It's hard to pay for it when you charge a quarter 50 cents more cost. Taking money orders. Any questions? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Bill Ratliff with the Missouri Bankers Association. Banks currently pay about 84% of the total division finance budget. And as Rich said, our costs can change yearly depending on the size of the bank and what it costs to do the bank examinations. We don't think a $200 increase for some of these folks that haven't had an increase in decades is too outrageous. The problem is if you don't change this, the banks are going to have to pay for it. I don't think it's right for the banks to have to pay for the regulation, payday lenders, and installment lenders. We don't mind paying our fair share, but we think the others should pay their fair share as well.
Witness. Seeing none, all witnesses are reminded of witness protection form. Mark will hunt you down.
Matthew Reed with the Independent Bankers. We are for this bill as well. I think kick everything with the experts.
Questions, witness? Seeing none, thank you. Next witness.
That's all I have.
Anyone like to speak against Senate Bill 345? Or any Senate substitute? Seeing none, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 345.
Will, you think you can do yours that fast?
No, Mr. Chairman. I think this will last a little longer than that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, before we go any further, I'll ask for a roll call so we can establish a quorum.
Senators Watson.
Here.
Cunningham.
Here.
Hageman.
Here.
Cross.
Here.
Riddle. Sager. Wallingford.
Here.
Wyman.
Here.
Kennedy.
Here.
Kubota.
Here.
Sifton.
Okay, voting on quorum, we now are an official meeting. I'm going to do this a little differently than I probably have ever done it. We'll see if it works or not. Senator Schott, I'm probably going to let you go first. I'll let you explain your bill. Then I'm going to have Senator Kraus do his bill. Then, so the audience knows, I'm going to let everybody who wants to testify, testify. If you have a specific problem with one bill over the other one, you need to note that in your testimony. That way we're not going to have two separate hearings on two, they're very similar. They're within 85, 90% similar. There are some differences, however. So if you have a difference in one bill over the other one that you want to testify against, please make that noted in your testimony. And probably if you do that, Barbara, do I need 2 witness forms? I probably would need 2 witness forms in that case, one for each bill, if you differentiate your testimony. So try to keep that in mind, and please, everybody that does testify today, fill out a witness form. Senator Schott, if you would please go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Rob Schott, Senate District 34, Senate Bill 169, which relates to early voting and to photo ID. This is my effort to try to find a meaningful solution to both problems in one bill. Right now, absentee voting is a sham. I've myself gone on election day or before election day and voted with the intent of not being in the district. I might have been, when I was a representative, planning to be in Andrew County, which is in my district, but not in my county. Working the polls up there where Dan Hageman lives now. And of course, I can change that intent and a minute later, I think everybody knows that it's a sham if you just understand the process. So really, what we ought to do is we ought to have no excuse voting. Now, the absentee voting is really for people who, can't get to the polls at all. It's for people who are out of the state or in the military. And it starts on the 6th Tuesday prior to the election. So what I would do is I would have no excuse absentee voting start the 2nd Tuesday prior to the election. And you don't have to have an excuse. You just go in and you vote. And I would also make it easier on people to vote on Saturdays. There are a lot of people who work during the week, and it's hard for them. And in spite of the fact that your employer is supposed to let you off, some people's employers make it hard on them. So I would have 2 8-hour voting periods on the 2 Saturdays prior to the election. Right now, it's just 4 hours on the Saturday prior. And of course, the state would have to pick up the fiscal note for that, since it would be an unfunded mandate. Now, the other piece of the bill is photo ID. And, the thing is that it's the public perception that you ought to have an ID to go into a federal building, get on an airplane, blah, blah, blah. You ought to have an ID to vote. But the truth of the matter is that having an ID really only prevents a person from impersonating another person. The photo does. And so I was talking to my own county clerk, and she says that her election judges are usually so busy that when a person shows their ID, they don't really like to take the time to, compare. Says that's not reality. And in fact, I've heard it said that there's not been one case of impersonation of a voter occur in Missouri history. I don't know if that's true. I'm sure that Senator Krause will clear that up if I'm wrong. But if that's really true, if it's such a minimal problem, while it may be the public perception, maybe we need to try to work on the problem, but not just use the heavy hand of saying that everybody has to have a photo ID, because there really is a downside. Some people, it really is hard to get it. And it probably would get filibustered anyway if we did that. So what I propose is that when you go in to vote, if you have a photo ID, you show it. And that takes care of the great majority of people. If you've got it, you show it. And then, if you don't have one, and you honestly don't have one, then you show some secondary form of ID, all that list of things, your water bill or whatever it is, those things. And then you sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury, so that literally you could go to jail if you lied. And you say that you are the person who is supposed to be voting, that you registered and that you're supposed to be voting, and that you don't have the ID. And then, once you do that, you'll receive a letter from the Secretary of State who will say, you can go and get a free, government-issued, non-driver's ID at state expense. And it'll be posted around the polling places that this would be an option to you. So the idea here is to try to get everybody an ID. And I understand that there are a couple 100,000 Missourians who don't have one. Now, there's a mistake in the fiscal note. Whoever drafted the fiscal note thought that the Secretary of State would have to mail a letter to every single registered voter, not just the ones who didn't have an ID. So that amounts to way over $1 million. So my fiscal note is like $1 million less than what they said. And plus, my bill would only require it one time. So there wouldn't be ongoing expense year after year, maybe a few people that were new that didn't have them. Anyway, that's what I see as the true way. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for the sponsor? Yes, go ahead, Senator Wong.
Oh, I do. I have a copy of the bill.
Sometimes you have the other pages on the same.
Oh.
So if you have the hard copy, then on page 2, it talks about you don't need to state a reason for requiring the absentee vote. So it's the election authority, without stating the reason that the voter is expected to present when it's supposed to vote on election day. But then in the next paragraph, paragraph 3, line 15 and 16, it says, if required. So if there we say you don't need it, now all of a sudden we say required.
Well, see, the reason is that I would say that the no excuse absentee voting would begin at, and you can see in line 6 and 7, 5 o'clock, beginning the second Tuesday prior to an election. But you can still absentee vote as early as 6 weeks prior to the election. So the if required would apply to the period of time prior to the. So I have a period of time when you do have to give an excuse, And it's especially for like people who are gonna be out of state that can't. And that way they can call up and they can say, mail me a ballot, you know, that kind of thing.
So why do you require for one if you're earlier, but?
Because they're not gonna be there in person to look at your, you know, look at your photo. I mean, we have to mail ballots to people that are overseas or nursing homes or whatever.
I'm gonna compare your bill just a tiny bit to Senator Kraus's. In a couple areas, it begins on page 5.
I haven't not studied Senator Carson's bill, but.
Yeah, well, this is an easy thing. You leave in digital image, he takes it out. But then on your next page, it's page 6, line 14 and 21, then you take digital image out. Why do you leave it in one area, you take it out in another?
I have no idea.
Okay.
No idea, but that is a good question, and I'll follow up on it.
And then on page 7, line 50, you talk about 3 secondary forms of identification. You don't possess a photo, but then going down to line 66, where it talks about the secondary form of identification, line 68A and line 74C, both are photo IDs, a driver's license and a college identification card.
I think that if you can have a photo, it's better than not having a photo.
But then it doesn't really need to, I don't think it needs to be there if you say he does not possess a photo, and then you do more photos.
Well, the thing is that in order to get a government issued ID, you have to show legal presence. Whereas to get a photo from, your university, you don't have to do that.
And then both to the half the photos, for the university ones, actually last year we had some student testifying and didn't do a particularly good job, I don't think. But the idea was that a college identification, photo identification doesn't say you're a citizen.
Right, and what I would do is I would say that we want our citizens to vote. We want to discourage non-citizens from voting. So if they don't have a government issued ID, we say, okay, you go ahead and vote, because we don't want to exclude anyone, but you have to sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury that you are eligible to vote and that you're a United States citizen. So it's less than having the government issued ID, which is expensive, politically difficult, and maybe unconstitutional depending on how you word them. But what I'm trying to do is kind of find a middle ground that works and that people can have some confidence in.
And so if they show a driver's license, what they're saying is they're a citizen of Missouri, and they're a registered voter and they have a right to vote. But if you're not a citizen of Missouri, you have to get a Missouri driver's license within 30 days.
If you're what?
If you're a citizen of Missouri, you're required to turn in your driver's license from the previous state in order to qualify for a Missouri license. So if you haven't done that, maybe you're not a resident of Missouri,
Well, I know, but not everybody drives. That's the thing. If you've done that, then, see, if you have a Missouri driver's license,
But if not anyone drives, what are they doing with the driver's license?
well, they would get a non-driver's license.
So this just talks about driver's license. This says or state identification, but this was driver's license.
Yeah, I guess it's possible that if you had a driver's license and you had not yet, let's say that my daughter lives in Chicago. She's been there for 4 years going to college. She has a Missouri driver's license.
Right, but she doesn't vote in Chicago either, right? She's not supposed to, does she? If she's a resident, then she needs to get the driver's license.
So that's
If she's
true.
not a resident,
Yeah, that's
then
right, that's true.
she can use their Missouri license.
That's true.
And then the last one on page 9, towards the top line, 121 talks about the Secretary of State has reason to believe they do not possess an approved form of photo ID. So how will the Secretary of State determine the voter does not possess?
What I would say is, when the person goes in to vote and signs the affidavit, the voting authority notifies the Secretary of State that this person did that. They have their address because it's on the form, and then the Secretary of State mails it out. That way, it's not a burden on the local election authority, and plus we have uniformity.
So that's really the only way that the Secretary.
Yeah, that's the only way that, as far as I know, that they would know. But at least they catch everybody who says, hey, I'm voting, I don't have a government ID. Then we send them the notice and we try to solve the problem over time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Cross.
Senator, I got a little bit of concern on your affidavit here. Do you think there's going to be a possibility that somebody will sign an affidavit because somebody handed it to them that they didn't bring ID in, and then there will be a situation where they do have a valid ID, and now we've got a situation where that person potentially be in violation of the law because, I mean, if they didn't bring the affidavit, they just signed it because they didn't have their ID there, and some judge wanting that person to be able to vote. I mean, I'm just asking.
Well, I guess that what you're basically asking are some people not smart enough to.
I'm not saying that. No, I'm saying that maybe they're hurry. Maybe they're confused. They came in to vote. They didn't bring their ID, and now they're signing an affidavit because somebody put it in front of them and they didn't take the time to review the affidavit. And now all of a sudden we've got. I'm thinking that could be a problem. And I don't know what we talk about.
You're exactly right. It could be a problem that people are confused.
Senator LeBeau.
For the secondary, do they get a regular ballot in your bill, or is it a provisional
I
ballot?
would have them just give me.
Regular ballot? Okay. And if someone had a voter ID, or someone had a driver's license, and they didn't produce it, and they showed one the secondary, would they be in violation of?
Well, I would say go get your driver's license, you know? Go get it.
But they wouldn't, if someone showed up, if I showed up and I didn't have it, but I had
Because
one
see,
my secondary.
when you sign the affidavit, you say, I do not possess a valid driver's license.
Okay, so if I went in there and I forgot my driver's license, so
But you
I walked in
have
the
to
dog or
alter it.
something, and I went to my polling place.
I guess you'd have to take it up with whoever is going to adjudicate that. What does the word possess mean?
And they said, do you possess one? Oh, wait, I better come back. That's what the prompt would be, probably.
Of course, if it was 6:59 PM, I mean,
Right.
kind of hard. Yeah, but I understand. I'm trying to find a middle ground that makes the public have more confidence and makes it easier for people to cast a vote.
I appreciate that. I'm just trying to understand how that would go. So the affidavit would say,
It just
I do
says,
not have one.
it says, and I do not possess a valid Missouri driver's license.
Okay. Answers my question. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the sponsor? Okay, we will have Senator Cross next.
Mr. Chairman, just logistically, would you like me to take a seat?
I guess you can sit there if you like, but Senator Cross, he loves company.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to present the SJR first? It's relatively simple.
Yes,
And then
I'd like to hear it all.
for the records, Senator Will Kraus representing the 8th Senatorial District, presenting Senate Joint Resolution number 5. This is the constitutional amendment to just allow General Assembly to require a photo ID. It does not require a photo ID in the Constitution. It just allows the General Assembly to issue statutory language to require it. So this is a may, the General Assembly can do that. So, and then once again, this goes back to the fact that the courts have thrown out voter ID in the past, and we think the voters in Missouri would want the safety-ness or the requirement to have a photo to verify when you're voting. I think it's important when we're having elections to safeguard those elections, and the only way we can verify who the person is a photo ID. Right now, in order to buy alcohol, buy tobacco, to get on an airplane, we all have to show photo IDs. You know, one of the things that's interesting is to get a government-funded phone, and some people call it the Obama phones. You have to bring in that photo ID to get your government cell phone. So I think it's interesting that in order to get a cell phone from the federal government, you have to have a photo ID, but in order to go vote, you can take your utility bill. So that's what the SJR does. You want me to take questions on that one first before we go to the actual bill?
Questions on this part of it from anyone?
All right, and Senate Bill 170 is the sectoral changes for photo identification, and it is contingent on passing either SJR 5 or House Joint Resolution 1, which is the constitutional change. So anything that we change in statute would not take effect until the voters have passed the constitutional change. And the first part of SB 170 would be no excuse absentee voting for basically 4 weeks. And I'll get into why we do that in a minute. Another section of the bill would require a photo ID, and it would be a government-issued photo ID, driver's license, non-driver's license, military ID, or other form of federal or state ID. If you do not have a photo ID, you would be able to vote, but it would be a provisional ballot. And the reasons you could do that: disabled, couldn't afford the documentation to get an ID, religious exemption, and then if you were born before 1941. And those provisional ballots would be counted in two situations. One, you came back with required ID later on to prove who you were, or two, your signature that matched the one that was on file with the local election authority. All the IDs would be free and paid for by the state in order to get one. It was interesting in Kansas, they passed a photo ID bill and almost 4 years ago, and they're only 500 people have requested to get a ID through there at the free process. And you look at our fiscal note, and our fiscal note's really high. And if you look at it, there's almost 400,000, according to the fiscal note, people that would be getting an ID. That's, I think, reality is we would probably only get around 1,000 people that would actually apply to get a free ID. If you look back at what the price size of Kansas, and if you use their numbers as a realistic approach. I go a little bit different than Senator Schaaf on his bill. We think it's very important to have the requirement for a photo ID, and because if people are going to cheat, if you don't, they're going to find a way to cheat. And then what we're trying to do is safeguard our election. We think it's very important to make sure that we know who is voting and that somebody's not impersonating another person. I think Senator Schaaf may be correct. I don't know if there's been any cases where we found someone impersonating somebody else in the state of Missouri, but I know that that has happened in other states. I think it's New Mexico. I didn't bring the example with me today, but last year I talked about it where we had a person with white hair go in and vote, and the judge said, "Is this you?" And he said, "Yes, it is." "So you were born in 1992? He had white hair," and the judge said, "I don't think so." And he called him out on it and found that he was impersonating his son. His son had left for the day or whatever, and he felt it so important that his son vote that he went and tried to vote for his son. So that has happened in another state, and I'm sure it's happened here, where it's just hard to prove without a photo ID and identify who that person is. So I talked real quick about the absentee voting. So we think, in an effort to try to make this bill palatable to the left and also to make it easier for voters to vote, we think in-person voter, in-person, no excuse absentee for 4 weeks is the right way to go. The reason why we chose 4 weeks is that closes the time period where you could register And then we don't want to have same day registration and same day voting. So we think that that's the right way to move forward in doing that. So that's kind of why we did that. I'll be glad to answer questions.
Senator, a couple of things. I'm looking at the House bill that's already been passed, and I just like to try to grease the skids so things possibly happen. They went with January of 1950 instead of 41. Do you have any thoughts on that? Why?
I do not know why they did that. I'm comfortable with the committee, or if we work with the House and coming up with a.
I just wondered if you know if there were any reasons.
No.
Also, they added, where you say states required to provide one form of personal identification, they also add, state and OP officers required to provide form of personal. Why did they have P officers? Do you know?
No, I don't. I know that they,
I
I know
the reason why you had P officers.
I know that they added, in the House, there was an amendment, I believe, on the floor that added, paying for a birth certificate.
That was going to be the next question.
But I don't know about the fee offices, one Senator, Mr. Chairman.
They're paying for a birth certificate even in out of state. If another state has a charge, they're paying for that. Just wondered if you've seen that.
No, I haven't got a chance to look at it. I figured I'd wait till it came to the committee and I would look at it when it got here.
Okay. Any questions for the sponsor? Yes, Senator Wally.
The similar question I asked Senator Shaw. And on page 6 of your bill, you have that there, section 8.427, that talks about persons seeking to vote in public elections shall establish their identity and eligibility to vote in polling place by presenting personal identification. And then it goes on to say that identification that satisfies the requirements. You know, we list the non-expired Missouri driver's license, the non-expired non-driver's license, identification of our service members, and then line 19, item 4, talks about the documents that satisfies all the following requirements, and also you remove digital image. What's the purpose of removing digital image? How's that different from photograph?
You know, I would have to talk to the researcher. I don't exactly know why the digital imaging. I think they may be just cleaning up, maybe somewhere we change the definition of photograph to include digital imaging, and they're cleaning up that here. I have to clarify why they chose to do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the sponsor? Okay, I think I'll let both of you step aside. And again, I'll kind of repeat, anyone that wants to testify, if you want to testify on one of these specific bills versus the other one, please note that. And you will need 2 witness forms. I apologize for that. If you testify for or against both bills. So with that said, I will ask for anyone in favor of both Senate Bill 169 and Senate Bill 170 and SJR 5, all 3. In favor of. Do anyone bring a tracker? All 3 are yes.
If you're testifying in favor of one, I think now is the time.
If you want to testify in favor of any of the 3 of us, this would be your option.
Thank you, Chairman. Committee. My name is Jeremy Cady. I'm a registered lobbyist for Missouri Alliance for Freedom. I am here to testify on Senator House's 170 and SGR 5. I'm going to look at the other a little bit more to come up with our where we're at on that one. Basically, though, most crimes we can either prevent them at the beginning, or hopefully we can bring the criminal to justice at the end after the fact. Voter impersonation is a little bit different. Luckily, we have anonymous elections. We don't really trust government to know who we voted for. that's a good thing. Think of the possible retaliation we might face in our elections if we didn't really have the freedom to go there and choose who we wanted to choose without that fear. Long ago, whenever the nation was founded, if we used photo identification, then that probably would have been a little too restrictive, seeing as photos weren't actually invented at the time. However, since then, I believe a little bit before 1850, well over 160 years ago, we've been using photos. Today, over 1.5 billion photos are uploaded to websites like Facebook and other similar sites. I don't think it is out of the realm of I'm trying to think here, sorry. I don't think it is out of the realm of not being controversial to implement this today to protect what is precious to us, and that is our vote. And so Missouri Alliance for Freedom and all of our grassroots supporters do support enacting photo ID to protect our vote here in the state of Missouri.
Okay. Any questions from the witness? Yes, Senator Lowe.
These measures have popped up around the country. Most of them have been ruled unconstitutional. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think one of the ones that have been ruled unconstitutional, they actually do not supply the photo ID. I think in those cases where a free identification was applied, in those cases it was not ruled. And I think oftentimes it's referred to as a poll tax. And whenever the ID is given for free to a lot of those court cases have ruled that that is not the case.
Do you think that the people who don't currently have a government issued photo ID think their vote is precious? Or just people with?
I would assume that they would think that it was precious, yes.
Okay. That's probably why we should protect them and their ability to vote. We can't use a Facebook photo. I can use a Facebook photo if I wanted to vote, right?
No.
There's lots of photos around.
But the state is willing to provide.
Not very many government issues.
Agreed, but the state is willing to provide that for free. I mean, we've come a long way in 150, 160 years, and the state is willing to provide an ID with a printed photo on it for free. Right now, the state provides a voter registration card for free to every voter. We're just going a step further with the state.
Well, in the Senator Krause's bill, it's restricted on which government ID it is. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else have a question for the witness? Thank you. Please fill out a witness form for, I believe it was 170. Anyone else testify in favor of any of these three bills, 170, 169, or SJR 5? See none. Anyone to testify against 169, 170, or SJR 5?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, John Scott from the Secretary of State's office, testifying against all the photo ID legislation today. We've testified against it in the past. Nothing about the office's position has changed. Secretary Andrews says that as the state's chief elections officer, it's his job to make sure that only eligible voters vote, but that every eligible voter has the opportunity to vote. And the office just can't support any piece of legislation that would disenfranchise a single eligible Missouri voter. So that being said, we've testified against this for several years in a row, but I always think it's important to remind the committee what we're really thinking about doing and what we're really talking about doing. We're talking about revisiting an issue that was decided by the Supreme Court in this state 9 years ago in the Longchain decision, where the court said that the photo ID legislation wasn't the least restrictive means and wasn't narrowly tailored enough to meet the state interest. It was an undue burden on voters. So we're saying, okay, Supreme Court, we don't care what you said in 2006. We don't want to try to craft a piece of legislation that meets constitutional muster. What we want to do is change the Constitution so that we can ram through the most restrictive photo ID legislation in the country. And it really would be the most restrictive photo ID legislation in the country. I don't think, but I do think that most Missourians, if they really took a look at it, would be surprised, potentially shocked if they knew how restrictive it was. Now, unfortunately, the way that the Senate Bill 170 addresses that is to put voters who don't have the very narrow types of ID required by the bill on the pathway toward a provisional ballot, and wouldn't allow election authorities to count those provisional ballots unless the person either signed the affidavit that matched up with their voter registration card that's on file, or returned to show, as Senator Krause said, with the proper form of ID. To say that that's a safeguard, to say that that's an exemption, to say that that doesn't disenfranchise people, just doesn't line up with the facts. So provisional ballots are a tough issue whenever you start putting people towards the provisional ballot if they don't have that form of ID. So over the last few years, we've seen around the country, as I think Senator LeBeau pointed out, pieces of photo ID legislation struck down by courts around the country. You know, I can go through some of the states where this has happened if anyone has any questions, but we've seen in Pennsylvania where it was struck down in early 2014 for very similar grounds as the Missouri law was struck down in 2006 to say there was an undue burden on those voters on what really is a fundamental right. We just can't support anything that disenfranchises a single eligible Missouri voter. If you look at the census results from 2010, and I can go through those, I've done in the past, there are tens of thousands of households that don't have cars, that use public transportation, folks that are over the age of 75, college students. And the way the legislation addresses that just does not safeguard those voters, so we can't support it.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Please fill out a witness form. I suppose I'm all covered. Anyone else testify against?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Denise Lieberman. I'm a senior attorney for Advancement Project, which is a national voting rights organization. I have been involved in working on voting rights here in Missouri as well as across the country and regarded as a national expert on voter ID and other voting issues. Actually also served as counsel of record in legal challenges to photo ID laws in several states, including not only Missouri, but Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and currently North Carolina as well. I want to first start by acknowledging the both senators for making an effort to try and address some of the barriers that testimony in prior years has revealed that voters will face with photo ID. And they both do so in slightly different ways, but I certainly appreciate that and appreciate you acknowledging that there are problems with sort of strict photo ID laws, such as the bill that was passed last week out of the House. But these bills fail to pass muster and will still end up relegating valid eligible voters to second-class citizenship. So first, on Senate Bill 70, I mean, the real driving issue there is that voters who lack one of the strict mandated forms of photo ID would be relegated to casting a provisional ballot. And we know from data from the Secretary of State that approximately 3/4 of provisional ballots in Missouri are not counted, many for reasons other than a voter's eligibility. So for example, if an election judge from both political parties neglects to sign the provisional ballot envelope, that ballot doesn't get counted, regardless of whether the voter was ultimately eligible. And there are a number of other reasons as well. The other key problem, again, with it is that while the statute provides that the state would provide a form of photo ID without charge, it doesn't carry the costs that voters will incur in getting the underlying documents necessary to get photo ID. And that's really where you find a lot of the problems with these laws around the country. People who are unable to get a copy of their birth certificate necessary to get the state ID. Or actually more commonly, people for whom their birth certificates have errors. My own mother falls into that category. And it turns out it can be an extremely difficult and often very expensive proposition to get those documents to match the names and the dates to match your voter registration. And for many people, that can be prohibitive. And so these problems and the very, very limited forms of photo ID would relegate this piece of legislation to making Missouri the strictest in the country, alongside states like Texas and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina in their voter ID laws. In contrast, Senate Bill 169 does try and take some of that into account, but it still doesn't quite make the mark. And so, for example, when the savings clauses that it provides for, in some ways, sort of mirror a process that we already have in place. Let's remember that Missouri law already requires all voters to show some form of identification. And it already requires voters to sign under penalty of perjury when they show up at the polling place that they are who they say they are. And so the savings provision in Senate Bill 169 kind of effectuates that same result that voters are already doing, but adds sort of additional burden to doing so. And the problem with both of these, even if the savings clauses saved those who lacked a photo ID, which they don't, is that they are a solution in search of a problem. National data studies demonstrate that in-person voter impersonation, which is the only malady that these laws can address, is exceedingly rare, virtually non-existent. So much so that proponents of photo ID laws in states around the country where I work in are now no longer even claiming that photo ID laws are necessary to protect against voter fraud. That the legislators in North Carolina have now changed their tune and say, no, it's to increase confidence in the elections. Certainly, that's a valid legislative purpose. Unfortunately, these laws don't do that. In the Wisconsin case, when Judge Edelman threw out Wisconsin's photo ID law, he said that photo ID laws are actually decrease the public's confidence in the electoral process. They make people fearful of the process. They chill voter turnout, voter participation, and are less likely to make the public feel confident in the integrity of the elections. Finally, really quick with a note on the no excuse absentee voting portions of both of these bills. Certainly, Advancement Project supports efforts to make voting more accessible, including eliminating excuse-only absentee voting. Unfortunately, the provisions in each of these sort of fall short in different ways. And I would suggest that if we want to incorporate early voting into the laws of Missouri, I'm all for that. Let's work on a piece of legislation that does that and that sort of meets best practices. And there have been a lot of studies about early voting. In fact, early voting is one of these things that has bipartisan support around the country. And what we know is that the key is in the details. The days that are allowed, so it needs to be outside of working hours. Weekends are very, very important, and I recognize Senator Schaaf's bill includes Saturdays, but unfortunately his doesn't include enough days. In the average around the country, in terms of early voting days, is 17 days. States around the country vary from about 10 days to about 45 days, with the average being about 17. And people need that enough time in order to be able to exercise that. In Senator Krause's bill, unfortunately, it doesn't take into account the importance of weekend or voting during non-office hours, as well as locations. Location. It's really important with early voting. In larger communities, people have a difficult time getting to a single location like the election authority. The best early voting bills around the country tend to have locations that are based on population basis. And so, I'll take further questions right now, but at the end of the day, these bills, while certainly I think acknowledging some of the problems for strict photo ID laws, I appreciate that, fail to pass muster and will still end up relegating thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Missouri citizens to second-class citizenship. And for good cause. The Missouri Supreme Court found 9 years ago that photo ID laws violate our state constitution. And so indeed, we need to remember that what we're looking at doing here is passing unconstitutional legislation. And I think that we should really think long and hard before taking that step as a legislative body, or to amend our constitution as JR 5 would provide, to strip out a key part of the right to vote, which is in essence what this legislation would do. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Thank you. Anyone else testify against 169, 170, and SJR 5?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Alvin Page on behalf of Missouri NEA. You'll be pleased to know that Senator Pierce has changed, has trained the education lobby as well. He might remarks to 3 minutes at most. Our association has spoken before this committee about these measures for a number of years, and my members are all employees of elected officials, so in addition to teaching government, they're also employed by elected officials. Elections matter. It's been interesting to watch the evolution of this issue. It's getting more complicated to sort out some of the issues. Our platform doesn't speak at this time on the side of absentee, no excuse voting. I think anybody that looks at that process could see that there might be some room for improvement. But at this point, our platform doesn't really give points for any particular provision in that regard, which is why we take no position on Senate Bill 169. We might actually consider supporting it because it doesn't seem to fall directly into the category of a more restricted photo ID provision. We do speak to the concerns that we continue to have since the Supreme Court spoke about the concerns of suppressing the vote amongst the most vulnerable, that the provisions like Senate Bill 170 might provide for. That continues to be a concern for us, given that we don't see a lot of needfulness in terms of a real urgent need to move forward on placing these kinds of additional restrictions. And given the Supreme Court's counsel, we would speak in opposition to those provisions of SGR 5 and Senate Bill 170. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else testify against? Seeing none, anyone testify for informational purposes only? Senate Bills 169, 170, and SJR 5. Seeing none, the hearing on Senate Bill 169, 170, and SJR 5. I make a motion we go into executive session. Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. We're now in executive session. I've got a question. I'm sure I haven't talked to any of them. Yes. Yes, I have a committee sub for Senate Bill 34 and 105. This would be Senator Wallingford's that extends voter registration deadline for certain military overseas, and Senator Krause's that allows military overseas voters to vote in all elections involving federal office, statewide legislative office, and statewide district. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean, to me, that just seems so easy. Is that, I think, does that work? Yes. I agree with you. I do believe with these other laws. Do what? Oh. Now, in looking at it, I thought this is kind of silly not to do them together.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's great. We got these through, they got different boards, it could be messing with each other, and I think it's a great idea to put them together.
Okay, all right, it has been passed out, you have it in front of you.
I'm looking at the document of the case evidence.
Okay, then made and seconded. Well, all right, now I've got some discussion. I'm gonna ask one more thing. Senator Sipton has 136. Would it fit in this? I'm just asking. 136 is the one where he does the emergency management people, Senator Sipton explained it better than I.
Yeah, it's the Hurricane Sandy bill, if you will. The emergency absentee voting for personnel that may be called up to respond to a natural disaster within a few days, or not an emergency, within a few days of the election. Are there, forgetting,
Well, let me ask you this, was it vetoed last year?
it was not, no, it was passed unanimously by both the House and Senate, but the Senate did not pass the House vehicle, and the House did not pass the
Okay.
Senate vehicle, it died.
If you guys are uncomfortable, it doesn't exactly, because yours are both military, that's why I didn't put it in. But it is voting, so I just wanted to bring it up and just say, you know, if you're, I'm gonna vote it out today, or ask for it to be voted out today, one way or the other. I didn't know if it needed to be included in this or not.
I think we can move forward and bring it back.
Okay, all right. I mean, they are military, and it is not, and that's the reason I didn't include it. Okay. All right, motion has been made and seconded. Any more discussion on the substitute for Senate Bills 34 and 105? Seeing none, all in favor of adopting the substitute, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, I will make a motion to do pass Senate-based substitute, Senate Bill 34 and Senate Bill 105. Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call.
Senators Watson,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Eggman,
Aye.
Kraus,
Aye.
Riddle, Sager,
Aye.
Wallingford,
Aye.
Wheelan,
Aye.
Kennedy,
Aye.
Lavota,
Aye.
Sifton.
Aye.
Okay, next I have Senator Dixon's. It modifies the process of filling vacancies in certain statewide and general assembly elections. Do you remember that one? When he testified, I think a lot of it was about the lieutenant governor, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe all of them. I guess it was all of them. We can read the summary to you, just so we know. Currently, when a vacancy occurs in the office of state representative or state senator, the governor must issue a writ of election without delay. The act removes the phrase "without delay" and provides that the writ shall be issued within 30 days. Do you remember that? Okay. I'll make a motion to pass. I don't think we had much discussion. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, I guess roll call.
Senators Watson,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Eggman,
Aye.
Kraus,
Aye.
Riddle, Sager,
Aye.
Wallingford,
Aye.
Wheelan,
Aye.
Kennedy,
No.
Lavota, Sifton.
No.
Okay, you have the vote of 9-2, I think, vote to pass. Next is Senator Dan Brown's Senate Committee substitute for Senate Bill 117, modifies the process of selecting candidates for special elections. I'll make the motion to pass first. And she is going to hand it out, so you'll have it first. This is the one, Joe, I'm gonna be real honest with you. The only problem I had with this one was this one. But I also understand why, going back to some things that have happened in Dan's district, I mean, when Jason Brown was his seat, there were appointments, what's happening is the committees are appointing these people.
That's right.
And like, in that case, 90 days later, they had the election, and the guy that wanted got beat. This just says you gotta have an election. That's really what it amounts to. It forces the primary. It forces the primary instead of the committees doing their thing. That's what it is.
If I remember, yeah, he had the legislative districts, members of the district.
Yep.
Could vote.
Yep, yep. And many of the committee, he explained it to me in their situation, which was down in southeast. And I would suspect most parts of the state would be the same way. Many of those committee seats weren't filled. And therefore, there was like a few people who were actually getting to pick the next legislator, very few people really considering. And then after they picked them, they had an election like 90 days later. And the guy they picked got beat. So it kind of showed they didn't pick real well. All this is saying is we just had an election. You know, we have a primary election, and the next person is voting on. I don't know, the fifth one was pretty big on it, but I also get where people who serve maybe ought to be voted on. So I'm kind of mixed, to be honest with you, but I told Dan we take a look at it, and maybe it's something that needs some discussion on the floor. I don't know. Somebody had their hand up. Yes, Senator Simpson.
Well, in that regard, I think it's a topic that doesn't warrant discussion. I am a little bit concerned about the logistics of it. I assume the substitute is all offices. I know the specific concern motivating the bill this year was the congressional office, but I assume this would apply up and down the, yeah.
Yes.
I think it's a topic worthy of discussion, whether or not it's had sufficient amount of discussion.
I'm not going to tell you it's ready for prime time yet, but I'm not sure why it doesn't need some discussion. That's kind of why I'm taking a little bit long.
I mean, ultimately, they do be elected or unelected. That's what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm mixed, Mr. I'm mixed on this. I mean, I would probably support kicking it out to the floor for further debate. I don't know, like you said, fiscal notes there, and
That's one of my biggest ones to swallow is the fiscal.
and I think that with the current situation right now, with terminals, representatives and senators tend to put what's next, and I think they leave earlier, and occasionally that leads us to put us in a situation where we're going to have more and more of these, so I don't know if that.
Well, would you like, let me ask you this, would you like to not vote on it today? How long ago, December?
I would.
I will withdraw my motion. How's that? That's just what I wanted. I wanted you guys to have some.
I'm not trying to stop it or.
No, I understand, and that was, we talked in my office, I was a little bit, I wasn't sure.
I want to go there to say, I'm more going to move this through for discussion before I'm concerned, and I think it comes through, and I think it's time for us to talk about it.
Before we get inundated with House bills, and I'm sure that's coming, we might try, if I can find a day where we can meet like this at 2 o'clock and just knock out a couple of bills. Maybe we could take 30 minutes to discuss some of these things. I would like that, maybe we can find time. Okay, all right, I will draw my motion. Now, next is Senator Simpson's, which we've already discussed. Senate Bill 136 allows emergency workers to request and receive and submit absentee ballots. Do you all understand that? I will make a motion to pass on Senate Bill 136. Okay, second. Yes. Any discussion? Okay, roll call.
Senators Watson?
Yes.
Cunningham? Hageman? Kraus? Riddle? Sager? Wallingford? Wheeling? Kevin? Livoda? Sifton?
Okay, by 11 of you have voted to pass on 136. The last one is technically substitute Senate Bill 146. This is Senator Pierce's. Modifies the provisions of law relating to licensing and certification of speech language pathologists and audiologists. I don't think this really opened up their scope as best I can tell, and just tweaked some things that they can do. It didn't appear to me to be something that was a problem, had no testimony against it. So I make a motion, we do pass. We can see, what changes did you make? Substantive introduced version follows. Has been added, paragraph C has been added. The new subdivision which specifies that an applicant for registration as a speech language pathology assistant must submit proof of completion of clinical hours. And the other one has been added to provide the provisions of law regulating speech language pathologists do not apply to persons completing the required amount of clinical hours for speech language pathology assistant registration as long as the person is under the supervision of a licensed speech language pathologist and has not completed the required number of hours. That's the same thing we have in physical therapists and that sort of thing, where they can work under a licensed physical therapist until they get their license. Not too big changes. Anybody got a problem? I'll make a motion, we do pass simply substitute. I make a motion, we adopt simply substitute Senate Bill 146. So your second. Has been seconded. Now discussion. Anybody got a problem? Okay, seeing none, All in favor of adopting, say aye. All opposed? I will now make a motion, we do pass Senate Committee Substitute Senate Bill 146. Motion been made and seconded, roll call vote please.
Senators Watson,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Hageman,
Aye.
Kraus,
Aye.
Riddle, Sager,
Aye.
Wallingford,
Aye.
Wheelan,
Aye.
Kevin,
Aye.
Svoboda,
Aye.
Sitnik.
Aye.
Okay, when you vote 11-0, you have voted to pass. Guys, that's all I had. I appreciate you getting here. Sorry. Some of these, as we go along, are probably going to have to get to it, but I honestly, this one got a little quicker than I thought, to be honest with you. I try to give everybody time to talk on these. I try to have them a little early. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Yes.